Hello everyone and welcome to the second session in the Planet to Plate Festival. 3 days of talks, performances and live events to celebrate the work of the Institute for Sustainable Food at the University of Sheffield. I'm Peter Jackson, one of the Institute's 2 co-directors, and it's my very great pleasure to introduce Ryan Taylor, an award-winning composer and producer. Ryan is a PhD student working with Nicky Dibben, Dorothy Kerr in the Department of Music and with Duncan Cameron in the Department of Animal and Plant Sciences. Working across the arts and sciences, Ryan's multimedia performance Aquakulture explores the rapidly changing nature of aquaculture, its connection to land and sea food systems, the nature of single-issue environmentalism and deeply rooted attitudes, perceptions and beliefs in what Ryan calls our post-truth era of misinformation, where there is a lack of trust in government, in corporations, and also perhaps in science. The work has been developed in collaboration with Associate Professor Julia Blanchard at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies at the University of Tasmania and with Professor Duncan Cameron here at the Institute for Sustainable Food in Sheffield. Ryan's going to start with a documentary and then a video performance of aquaculture, followed by a Q&A with you, the audience, which Duncan Cameron is going to moderate. So please post your questions on the live chat facility or use the Twitter handle #PlanetToPlate. There'll also at the end be an opportunity to complete a short survey to feed back your thoughts on this session to Ryan. So without further ado or any more from me, please, Ryan Taylor is now going to introduce his work, Aquakulture.
I first started on this project, I was invited to sit in on this workshop, and there were these marine ecologists, industrial partners, terrestrial-based scientists that work with agriculture, and I was sat on this panel listening to how they were going to solve this problem about sustainable aquaculture. It was really nice being a fly on the wall listening to these guys pull this work together, which is actually a really complex bit of science. It was interesting for me because then I had to sort of present where I'm coming from and how I might communicate their scientific research through music. It was the Colin Pillinger Award for public engagement, and that was through the Royal Society. It's to do with this current project, so conceptualising, putting a multimedia composition in around this research about sustainable aquaculture. Much like music works with the moving image, if you're watching a film, like music provides all the subtext, we could do something similar with science and look at maybe some of the more tricky areas with the science and fuse that with some infographic material, some emotional music, evocative music, and present an audience with a chance to self-reflect on their own practices and some of their own decisions.
You were telling me about Richard's PhD. We were having a coffee in Salamanca Place over breakfast, and we had this kind of
epiphany. Yeah.
This is what we need to do. We need to work on aquafeed, and we literally ran back to your office, didn't we?
We ran back. We went to the whiteboard and we started scribbling on the whiteboard, and we literally wrote this research grant proposal in 3 hours, maybe.
And it was about a day later, we were in Toruna for a different meeting to go and meet Katrina McLeod, and we were talking to Chris, who was the head of was the head of the aquaculture facility.
Yeah, and still is.
And we told them about the idea, and they both kind of sat bolt upright. Katrina was just like, this is brilliant, and that's where the be careful what you wish for idea came
Yeah.
from. And Chris, what did he call this? A new paradigm, a game changer.
So I took all of this information with me back to the UK, along with some interview transcripts from the people that I was speaking to here, and I started to compile a few different themes from it all, which eventually became track titles, which was nice because then I was able to sort of, like I'd approach like doing a film or a TV program, I started to create the music for that purpose.
That's the process that the three of us went through when we were kind of conceiving of what we might do for the performance that you and the piece of music you've written. We threw lots of ideas around, didn't we? And the workshop that you presented at kind of fueled lots of discussion points.
Do you know what, actually, like philosophically then, taking that further, because you've not seen it yet, but there's like a framework for the music, which is stuff that I've already written, which is based on your input, your interviews. So there's like, you know, every song's the set amount of time every time I perform it, because it's all to track that I've produced. But within that, there's loads of space, and most of it's improvised. So what you're going to see is like a load of improvised music, and it's like philosophically, it's like similar to what we're talking about. I'm in this space to like experiment. You know, you'll call it experiment, I call it improvisation. It's the same thing.
Any medium you can use to bring and involve scientists in their communication is crucial.
It's the whole point of...
It helps you reflect back on the science too. Like for me, it affects how I think about things in a way that I didn't anticipate, really.
And I think it changes how you communicate, not just out with the academic community, but also as a scientist. I know from doing the sci-art stuff, if I look at my writing now, published journals aimed at scientists, I'm writing completely differently than I did 3 or 4 years ago, because I've learned some things about narrative story that I didn't know before.
I'm going to cite that, because like, when I've been researching the different models of communication, it's always one directional. There's somewhere that it tries to be bi-directional, but it doesn't quite hit the mark.
What I'm really interested in is seeing how that actually can affect how people view a particular scientific problem. Can we change how people think about aquaculture? And not that we don't want to shape how people's thoughts, but we would like them to understand issues in a way that's really made me appreciate the complexities of these issues rather than that black and white.
This notion of reconnecting scientists with people and trying to reinstill trust in a post-truth era where we've got this mistrust with scientists and certainly with corporations. So that's what this piece of music aims to do, really, is to explore some of those ideas and create a shared space for dialogue, for people to think about these things and discuss it moving forward. Something in our culture.
But when we take a systems level approach and we think about the environmental cost of producing those crops, suddenly that clarity disappears.
I love the idea that bringing creativity and meeting art with science can, through this piece of music and the visual, which has just blown me away today, because I'd heard the music before, but to see it overlaid with the visuals was even more impactful. How important this is as a message carrier for us to be able to share with people the complexity of aquaculture, complexity of the human condition that needs aquaculture as part of many systems that enable us to live and grow and be part of the world. I love the way he's really made it accessible to speak to your heart and to recognise that you can have high-level thinking alongside deep emotion and connect the two and reflect on the two. You know, the amazing things that I'd felt and thought about listening to that music, I was full of more questions.
Hi, welcome again to the University of Sheffield. In case you missed the intro, my name's Ryan and I'm a current PhD researcher here at Sheffield University, working in the music department. You'll have just seen a mini documentary about the ball that we had in Tasmania a couple of years ago, where we were very lucky to go and work with some of the scientists there to help realise this, I guess to really tell this story about the research that we're doing around sustainable aquaculture. And the documentary showed our launch in Tasmania, and just prior to the apocalypse starting, we were hoping to do a UK launch here in Sheffield, but sadly, due to COVID, we couldn't do that. So what we're going to show you next is a performance, a recording of the performance that we did during lockdown. I'm really proud to share this one with you. It's been funded by the Royal Society, and I've had lots of help from my colleagues here at Sheffield and over in the University of Tasmania. There's going to be a Q&A to follow, because I'm sure, like most of my scientific colleagues in Hobart, you're going to have the same question, you know, what on earth is a musician doing working with science? And I'd love to have some questions from you, so if you can put that in the feed, I think it's down below if you're on a mobile device, and I'll happily answer some of them. And if you don't do that, I'm going to have to do a spinal tap and fill out playing Jazz Odyssey for 40 minutes. So without further ado, please enjoy this performance of Aquakulture.
big thing, which is a driver mainly, was economics. The reason they exploited seals, wild, wool, they produced something that you could export.
what people believe about what's right and what's not right. And so, I find it really interesting. I think the role that the media has played has it can maybe exacerbate views, it can influence people's beliefs on any topic. I do sometimes get worried about the disconnect between the facts and what's presented in the media, and then how that misrepresentation shapes people's views and perceptions. And in part because the media present things in a much more easy to understand way, maybe it cuts through all that complexity that I just described into something that's very black and white, yes or no, wrong, good or bad. And so I think, that's something, as a scientist, I think I struggle to kind of, maybe overcome. You always just have this background concern that your science might be misrepresented when you're dealing with the media. And so you have to go back and forth, and a lot of it's to do with communication and how we as scientists communicate in this particular way, which is not really that accessible to everyone. So I think, from a personal point of view, the challenge is to continually try to improve the forms of communication that I use and get involved in. And so that's through, writing pieces that are more journalistic style, or, really talking through things with science communicators or journalists using infographics. Something that I've become really interested in is engagement with artists, because I think they represent the issues in a more imaginative way that reaches people differently than, say, facts or figures and numbers, and it kind of engages with people's emotions, and maybe has the capacity to change the way you think. For me, when I see art or listen to music, it affects how I think about it, and it makes me feel more imaginative. And it's certainly that process of working with artists and musicians has benefited my science. What I'm really interested in is seeing how that actually can affect how people view particular scientific problems. Can we change how people think about aquaculture? And not that we don't want to shape how people's thoughts, but we would like them to understand issues in a way that's real and maybe appreciate the complexities of these issues rather than that black and white.
It's hard to see the wood for trees. Trying to understand what motivates our industries. Capitalist underpinnings might account for past winnings, but it's time to move forward for ecology, sustainability, more than just another earth. Manufacturing responsibly will benefit the net worth, because there's a cost to all we do and all we say and all we learn to be true. Trust. Who do you? Thinking about the way the mega corporations screw you. Well, step back and put your thinking cap on and be forewarned. Your same old answers won't wash with me. I think freely and critically, and if you're caught up politically, won't see what you need to see, because there's another narrative beyond the blurring lines, and I know that it's high time you understood the industry. something in our culture.
Production is full of trade-offs. First principles, it feels attractive to going to a completely terrestrial plant-based diet. But when we take a systems level approach and we think about the environmental cost of producing those crops, suddenly that clarity disappears. level approach takes natural science, social science, it integrates arts and humanities through understanding culture into evaluating the sustainability of a problem.
Wow. Amazing every time I watch it. Thanks so much for allowing us to screen that, Ryan, as part of the festival. We've got a few questions coming in, but just to remind you, if you do have any further questions, if you want to put them in the live feed at the bottom of the screen, that would be brilliant. But I can start with some of the questions that we do have. So which one to start with? I guess short and simple, why music and science?
Sure. When I started down this road of interdisciplinary work, I wasn't sure who I was going to collaborate with. And when I was doing my masters, I was thinking about collaborating with sculptors, dancers, and I think it was when Anthony introduced me to you, our collaborator Anthony Bennett, introduced me to you at the pub, and I realised, I can collaborate with a scientist as well. And I wasn't sure what that looked like, and then we sort of had some discussions about it, and it became apparent that there's a way for music to communicate. I guess it's not why music and science, but more how can the scientific community lend what the humanities have to offer in terms of communicating. And it just got me thinking that much like how a music can fill in all of the subtext in a movie or in adverts or anything to do with moving image, it can play a role in communicating anything because it's such a powerful communicator. So yeah, when we sort of started talking about some of the problems that are going on in the world and some of the scientific interventions that are happening, then yeah, so music became, to me, an obvious choice. I'm trying to think of how I might be able to demonstrate some ways. I guess when we're talking about how music communicates on a broad sense, if we're watching a film or something happening and we've got dialogue between two people, now the audience is getting what we're saying, they're understanding the discussion that we're having. But of course, they don't know what's happening in our heads or psychologically or what else is happening. And that's where the music can really make a difference. So I could be having a conversation with you now and it's like, Duncan, I've just had a phone call from your mother. She's been coming back from the supermarket. And, it says one thing. But you can see quite dramatically if I was like, Duncan, your mum's just got back from the supermarket. She's got something to tell you, it's quite important. All of a sudden, the way that we frame that, the music, I mean, that's quite, an obvious way to do that. But, with science communication, there's more nuanced ways we can use music in that way, which I can go on about if you want me to. Or
well, I'm just kind of thinking, kind of building on the examples that you've just given there of why science and music can work so well together. And from my perspective, the ability of music to convey emotion, which is something that maybe we overlook as scientists, and it's quite hard for us to communicate that. So how, you've given us a little window into your creative practice, but could you walk us through your creative practice? Maybe how you created some of the very distinct sonic landscapes that you created in aquaculture?
Sure. I think it's important to understand the rationale as to why. I think, it's one thing going there and creating some music, but it's like, why am I doing it, and what is the narrative, what is the story here to unpick? I think often when there's these kinds of projects happening, it's unspecified what the role of the composer or sculptor or communicator. It's not always crystal clear what is wanted. So the first thing for me to do is to mine what is the story here. So for an example, when I was in Tasmania with you and our scientific colleagues and the industrial partners and everybody else in Tasmania, I was trying to get a sense of not only what's happening with the aquaculture practices, which we can talk about if you like, but I started to see another theme emerge, which was what's the deal with this distance between science and the general public. And a lot of these themes we were talking about with regards to, like in the video when we're talking about sustainable aquafeed and ethical decision making regarding what we consume and what we want to support. It's like an overarching theme for that is really about trust. Who do we trust when we are making decisions? Is it the scientists? Is it the people that are trying to sell us the things? So with that in mind, I was going back to my compositional practice. I mined that information to get themes, which became track titles. Whilst I was also there, I recorded audio from the workshops that we had there. And I was really lucky to be allowed to go into the facility there at the Institute for Marine and Antarctic Studies and record the sounds of the fish tanks and the mechanisms that were all happening, along with some video that I shot there. So all of these bits of footage, I was able to then bring back and curate this sort of sonic landscape upon which to then build the rest of the sounds. So in the track we were just listening to, the opening track, you've got some bits of audio from the interviews that we were doing there, some bits of footage from the workshop, and there was the sound, believe it or not. We went on that motorboat. We went out on that boat, didn't we? Well, I actually recorded the engine of the boat and then ran that through a synthesizer and generating music from alternative sound sources. And then I was able to sort of distill these ideas down to themes. So, for example, that last one that we listened to, which is called Systems Level, it was another sort of theme that emerged from our discussions and from trying to understand the aquaculture side. There was this overarching thing about, well, any scientific endeavour or observation takes place in a global system. And when I think about that, and I thought about that from a compositional perspective, it's like, well, what do I want to tell an audience about that? How can I influence or not influence, but how can I bring them to the table and get them to think about it? So in music, with Systems Level, that drum and bassy one, we've got this pattern that's wanting to get home, and it never quite does. Where it wants to go is it wants to get there, but we never go there. So I'm trying to, that's like a metaphor really. This Systems Level thing is, we can't just look at food production or anything to do with sustainability, whether it's plastic in the ocean or sustainable aquaculture, as one thing. It can't just be, well, plant-based is best because that's better for the animals or better for sustainability. It's not as simple as that. There's this massive system to think about. And it's an ongoing thing. The questions, the grant that we started working on doing that, the questions there are still not answered. Hence, we don't know yet. We're trying to get home to this place, but we don't know. So we can do that through the music. That's a little glimpse into some of the ways that I try and translate what I'm doing.
Oh, yeah, awesome.
Yeah.
So I guess one of the things that obviously you think about when you're creating these kind of works is who's going to be there and how they're going to respond to it. So
I don't know if you could walk us through the way you think the audiences, or the way you'd maybe like, the way you planned audiences to make sense of your work. So it's very complicated.
It is. Music functions in lots of different ways. If I was to, again, just sit here and play something, that doesn't really mean anything on its own if you're thinking about the notes. And when an audience walks into one of my performances, they're not just getting this, they're getting, it's like a multimedia experience, as you've seen on the previous thing. So, can you remember when, we're definitely old enough to remember going to Woolworths and buying CDs. And like, what's the first thing you did when you got hold of that CD? I think yours might have been a Belinda CD. The first thing that you do is you look on the back and you see, well, the first thing you do is you see the album cover.
Yeah.
That tells us something straight away. We're not just listening to the music. We're being informed by all these other external processes. There could be something in the album cover that reminds you about, an area of your life or a problem or something. You go on the back and the track titles then tell you more. They tell you something else. So it's not just the music, it's how music and all these other stimuli work together to tell the story. So when an audience member comes to see Aquakulture, they're walking into, it's a strange concert space. We've got these big screens up and a grand piano. They know that it's about aquaculture. So straight away they're going in there thinking, well, there's a subject matter here. What I'm hearing, how does that relate to that? And of course, then we bombard them with some statistical information, some scientific information. But then I guess, in order for it to breathe properly, we give them all the information, lots of strobing and some wild and crazy music stuff. But then I try and come back to this period of reflection.
Yep.
So almost after every song, there's like a little bit of a breather and something chilled happening. And this reflection it serves the purpose of, here's a lot of information. Can you now think about how that information relates to your everyday life? Whether it's something about like the food that you choose to eat, whether or not whatever your diet is, whatever your reasons are for whether it's sustainability or whatever it is, what is your part in all of this? So when someone sees aquaculture, that's what I'm trying to give them: some stimulus and then a moment to reflect on their own lives.
That's well, you just fed into the next question that's just come through from the audience, and I guess you partially touched on this, but this question is that your work is very complex in terms of the different types of media you have used. How important is the visual side of the performance to convey themes and emote?
Yeah, that's a good question. Very. It's like I just said, really. I can go pretty far with music on its own, but like using mixed media gives me, I can tap into a whole range of emotions and themes doing it this way. So the video is important. I curate the videos myself. If there's something that I've not been able to film, like if I've been out there, I've used some stock footage in my own way to create a narrative. So as a multimedia composer, I guess that would be my title in this role. It gives me a ton of flexibility to attack an audience in any way that I want to. So yeah, I would say that it is important to use mixed media.
Now this is a really really interesting question, and one that hasn't occurred to me before, and that's, can you tell us why you decided not to include representations of fish in an artwork reflecting on aquaculture?
No. Why didn't we use fish? It wasn't really a conscious decision. I thought that the aquaculture served as a vehicle for some of this higher level stuff that was happening at the time. So, I was tasked with trying to put together some kind of information about aquaculture practices and try and understand that myself in a way to then to output to an audience. But I do think that for me, the significant part of the work is these areas of trust. you know, we've got this issue now. I mean, just look at the pandemic, for example, where you've got, you know, a misinformed, sometimes misinformed public, and it's hard for them to make decisions about things. And, you know, it's very difficult to know how to place trust. We've got a lot of different people telling us different things. So that was something that came out of the aquaculture thing, because it's not just about our scientific community trying to understand how science works. There's also an industrial side to that as well. Yeah. Someone's making money off the back of selling, you know, salmon. That's the output for it. So yes, the fish is obviously an important part to it, but to me it was the other themes emerging from that, which is the story I wanted to tell. You know, we started with that first piece, sort of setting the scene with, you know, you've got the visual show, a couple sitting down at a fish restaurant, then you see, you know, someone hauling some fish in. So, you know, I did show some fish, but but you know, it's just setting the scene. But the rest of it is more about how that story unfolds in terms of, you know, ethical decision making, science in general, I guess.
And you know, in that answer and throughout our conversation, you've talked a lot about language. And the next question really speaks to that. So I think I will ask this one next, which is, like science, music has its own language, which requires a level of fluency in its audience. Is it possible to create a common language that's accessible to all?
That's kind of a difficult question to answer. Is it possible to create a language through music? How are you interpreting that one?
So yeah, I'm at a number of levels, but I guess what they're trying to say is, do you have to have a certain understanding of music, of the technicalities, to access what you're doing, or is it more fundamental than that?
I think music works best when it's not some high art form that requires some, you know, superior knowledge about or anything like that. I think music works best when it's clear and makes a point. And again, it's hard for me to articulate from in terms of like playing the music, because all of my work is done with music and visuals, which unlocks all this extra side to this extra facet to it, I guess. Does an audience member have to have knowledge about the inner workings of music? Probably not. But I guess there'll be people that attend it that are musicians that might understand, you know, there might be some penny drop moments and like, oh, right, he's done that here or that there.
And I guess, you know, from my perspective, sometimes it's not always appropriate to create a common language, but maybe to understand that there are different languages at play, and that people take different messages from the work that you do depending on their perspective.
I think it's important. Like I try and show my process, which is why why we did the documentary, because I think understanding the process is important. But you know, if you're going to see a movie, you don't necessarily want to peek behind the veil to see what's happening there. But you can watch a movie and appreciate all of the work that's got into it.
Sure.
And you know, that's why we did the documentary, really, to show why am I doing this? Why have I made some certain compositional decisions? And of course, then the finished product is the finished product.
Absolutely. So I guess moving on to a different theme. We've got a question here that your art piece is very rapid paced for an informative piece. Is this something you intended, and does this reflect your target audience?
Yes. I mean, to be fair, the video that we showed was different to the experience.
Sure.
On a gig, because if you're at the gig, all the text-based information is there a lot longer for people to look at it, to digest it, whereas for the artistic purposes of this video, they've been quite cut. So I understand why. I think somebody else mentioned that to me about it's quite rapid and there's a lot to take on. I guess it's like I said before, really, I do like to put the information across in a way that shows various angles and then offer this period for reflection, just through sonically, really, through the music and visually. There's not much happening on the screen at the end of each tune, deliberately, so everybody can go, oh, hang on a minute, you know. I don't know if it's a format that I'll carry on, you know, with future work. Keep it. I've learned some lessons through aquaculture for sure. You know, one bit of feedback that I got when we did it in Hobart is it does move quite quickly and there's quite a lot of information to take on. So that's something that I can carry forward and refine. And
I certainly think, you know, when you're immersed in it, as we were a couple of years ago in Hobart, it's quite varied in pace actually. There were some moments which were much kind of more reflective and gave you that opportunity. So, you know, I guess for me it kept my interest because this is something I know quite a lot about, and I'd obviously not seen it until you performed it in Hobart, which was nerve-wracking and exciting all at the same time. And I think that the next point is a really interesting one, which is science is empirical, whereby art's responses follow complex and varied inputs. How can we welcome artistic diversity when not welcoming incorrect, diverse science?
Sure. This was it was a sticking point when I first tried to think about how music and science work together. I really wanted there to be some two-way avenue whereby it wasn't just me making pretty music about the amazing science that I was seeing. I was trying to work out if there's a way between, and like as the questions that, you know, states, there's a big responsibility as an artist to make sure that the scientific information that I'm putting across isn't inaccurate. That being said, I do take my own artistic license to have an opinion about certain things and put it in there. This thing about music and science being integrated, aquaculture is what we call presentational format, in that I've responded to what I've learned and I'm putting that across to an audience to inform, to challenge, and to create a space for dialogue around it. So that's this one-way thing that we're talking about. But then there's been like other studies and other bits of work done where it's been a participatory format. I always say that wrong, I got it right this time. Whereby the science and the music or art installation or whatever is integrated with the audience. So there's not this line between art and audience. People are working on things together. And I think this kind of touches on this integrated thing where it's a two-way street. An example would be some collaborative music making in a group of people. So you've got students, for example, and they're trying to digest the science and then make some music about that. And this has been shown to aid like retention of information over time. Again, going back to how that then feeds back into the science. It's hard to say. I mean, my scientific colleagues, such as yourself, have said that it affects how you think about certain scientific conundrums. But I guess we wouldn't expect music to inform that side of it. But I would expect the music to inform how you would then output your own findings.
I think for me, seeing the science that you've focused on for such a long time reflected back at you in a way that you have no control over, it's almost guaranteed to make you see things in the science that you didn't see before, and to ask questions that you had no reason to frame before. So as a scientist, I think there is definitely that bidirectionality. You know, Julia and I certainly started to revise the way we were thinking about some of the questions that we were framing, just because you see it large on the screen, and that's incredibly powerful.
Just before we move on from that one, there is an aim of science communication that does address this in some, from one angle, at least. If we forgot about music for a second, there are various aims of science communication, whether it's to benefit the public understanding of science, to enhance social acceptance of science, But one of the ways that science communicators work with the public is to try and understand the public perception of science, then feed that back into the process. So when I talk about participatory, there you go, musicking, that's this has not been done yet, but that could be a way to gather a public opinion or to gather information on, I don't know, how the public use their own gardens, for example. We can mine information using the music to do that and then feed that back into the science. So that is one way that we can give back to science. It's not always going to work like that, but worth pointing out.
No, great. Absolutely agree, 100%. And I think we've probably got time for one more question, since we started a little bit late. So I'm going to ask this one because I'm genuinely interested in the answer. Your work raises big questions about truth, misrepresentation, and the role of science. Do you want to tell a specific story or let multiple stories coexist?
Within the context of aquaculture, for example, there were multiple stories around misinformation. Well, it's about who propagates the information for me. And sometimes I don't know what people's motivations are or what the intentions are. There was a track on there which features the lovely Julia Blanchard talking about, some of her concerns about how the media can take a piece of information and run with it one way or the other. And, sometimes it's pro-science and sometimes it's anti-science, and sometimes it's the best intentions gone wrong. So when we look at misinformation like that, I guess the big question is when there's any story, whether it's in the news, whether it's social media, my immediate question from reading any article is who gains from this story and do I trust them? And so that is the story for me. It's who gains and who are the gatekeepers for the information. And then within that, of course, there's lots of sub-strands, whether it's people that have got agenda regarding sustainability, regarding any kind of doctrine, whether it's the plant-based is best doctrine, which is obviously a good cause, but as we know, it's not the only solution to this. So, the misinformation, it's not necessarily from people wanting to peddle bad information, but it could be from people that are slightly agenda-driven, no matter how good the will is. Greenpeace got it categorically wrong in their well-meaning brochure about sustainable aquaculture, when they were talking about this plant-based is best thing, and we simply don't know that yet, unless your studies have said different since we last did it. I know 2 years ago, that wasn't right. So, we've got to be careful with information and who the gatekeepers are, and I think being an informed public is something we should all think about, especially when it comes to Planet to Plate and thinking about food and decision making.
I 100% agree, and I think the media is always something as a scientist that you're aware of and concerned about. I will never forget being described as a peddler of university disaster pornography after speaking at the Paris climate talks, and being trolled by right-wing American news websites for about a month and thinking, crikey, okay, I didn't think what I'd said was that controversial. But, I see lots of stories within aquaculture, and I think that's one of the things that I really enjoy about it, is you can see all these different stories, and not one of them is absolutely right and not one of them is absolutely wrong. And I think, when I saw the full performance of it, those stories became even clearer, and it asks you to evaluate each one of them, and I think that's why it was so powerful. As the audience member was saying in the documentary, that you can have complex thinking and at the same time have a very strong emotional response to it.
I was going to say it's a fine line between making something clear and inviting people to the table, which is why some of the stuff is concrete and a lot of it is open-ended with aquaculture, and it's more about creating this space to have a conversation about it,
or to want to know more. And I think aquaculture does that very well. That ambiguity and the complexity of the visuals and the complexity of the music at the same time, you have periods, as you say, where you get time for reflection. Think, what have I just seen? I need to process that, and it's really powerful. So I think that's just about all we've got time for. Thank you so much, Ryan, for presenting that and giving us a window into how you compose. Just one thing before we go, to remind everybody, if you would like to help Brian with his PhD, it would be hugely appreciated if you would fill in the survey. I think there's a link.
There's a link, and I think there's going to be a QR code on screen. If you've got your phone handy, if you're looking on a laptop, then you should be able to. Yeah, there you go. There's a little QR.
Brilliant. So the QR code is there. So yeah, if you do get the opportunity, I think Ryan would and I would really appreciate it if you could fill in a very quick survey about what you've just experienced. So that's number 2 for the Planet to Plate Festival down, and hopefully you will be able to join us later this evening for the last event of today, which will be a window into the new aquaponics mini farm that's just being built in Sheffield in association with our partners Regather.